Welcome to the Offshore Accountant podcast, where we have incredible guests from all around the world to talk about accounting and also how to run a more efficient firm. One of the most important elements that determines our success in our careers or in running our firms better is effective communication. In the present landscape, where we have global teams and also global clients, how do we make our team communication and client communications better? To help us navigate this issue, we have today professional speaking coach and communications expert, John Yeo. John is a professional speaker himself, and he also coaches leaders and teams on better speaking and communication strategies. He is the licensee of TEDx Melbourne, the first independently run TED platform in Australia, so he knows what makes a better communicator. John, welcome to the Offshore Accountant. Love to have you here.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
So, John, when we were exchanging emails, what I found interesting was your email signature, right? There you have a quote from Warren Buffett. I want to read that quote. Now you can improve your value by 50% just by learning communication skills, public speaking. If you can't communicate and talk to people and get across ideas, you are giving up your potential. So would you like to begin by expanding on that?
It's a very simple premise in that there's a big difference between people knowing what you do and valuing what you do.
Yeah.
And so whether we're talking to clients or your team members, people need to value the contributions you make and recognize the value you're adding to that work, whether it's a conversation or a narrative or a project. And so I like to think of things in first principles, and that Warren Buffett quote is probably one of the best in terms of first principles.
Right. Why don't we start with the basics, right? When we talk about communication or effective communication, what exactly an effective communication means in the workplace, and maybe how different it is from just chatting with your coworkers?
I think when you're chatting with your co-workers, it's really a functional and operational endeavor. It's transfer of information. And transfer information can be done verbally and it can be done written.
Mhm.
The value in verbal is you can see people's response in real time, and you can tailor or shape or maybe even articulate a message to them to make sure that they're not only understanding what you're saying, but resonating with what you're saying. I think there's a big difference between people hearing what you say and understanding the meaning with what you say. And so it's that meaning, it's the human element, it's that visceral experience when people hear what you say that causes people to sit up and pay attention. And our job as communicators and as leaders is to make sure that people are paying attention.
Right. And also maybe there's a difference between the setting as well, right? Where chatting would be a sort of informal type of communications, while when you are working in teams and trying to get across your ideas, it is more formal. And whenever you are talking, you want your things to get across.
Yeah. I think they're one of the many contexts that people need to consider. Quality of, for instance, quality of internet of a Zoom call, for example, is a factor. Whether you're in person is a factor. Whether you're on a phone is a factor. But there's other things that are also factors, like what's your trust and rapport relationship with that person?
Yeah.
Do they like detailed conversations? Do they like conceptual conversations? Are you able? Is this a first-time meeting or is this a follow-up meeting?
Yeah.
Even things as basic as did they have their morning coffee are factors. And so, when we're talking about different types and different moments, as far as I'm concerned, they're just different aspects to the experience that you're having. In my world, it's understanding you have a message, you have an audience, and you have you as a communicator.
Right.
And it's about managing all those variables to maximize the impact you're having at any given moment.
So what bars you from having that impact, having your message getting across? What are the biggest mistakes that people make in getting across their ideas or their information?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake people have is they assume that more content or more information is better. That for some reason, people think that if they're going to explain everything, they might as well explain everything to the nth degree. And the reality is no one really cares. And this is where succinctness and brevity allow you to not only have impact, but also not waste their time respectfully, and also be clear in your head. Because if it's clear in your head, it can be clear in their head. If it's not clear in your head, they haven't got a chance. And people who aren't clear tend to talk too much.
Right. So if you want your ideas to get across, first you have to be clear about your own idea. And that clarity helps you boil down your ideas to as little sentences as possible, and then you can deliver
Yes.
that message and people will understand as well. But when you are rambling, people will also get switched off.
Yeah. Yes, that's definitely the case. And the other bit, when you're clear, you can focus more on the impact you're having rather than the words you say. You know, I tell people all the time, everyone knows you should eat well and do lots of exercise. It's a given, but almost no one does it. And so there's a big difference between people, what they know and what they do. And our job as communicators is to make sure that they know, that they really relate to what you're saying.
When we are, talking in our team, right, communicating with our team, how can we build that space, that positive space where we can exchange ideas and people are more receptive to one another when we are talking to each other, communicating about our clients or helping each other on doing our work?
Yeah. So in any communication, there's three primary components. There's you, your message, and your audience. Now, I mentioned clarity. That's the important piece with your message. You, as a communicator, you need to be articulate. You need to be clear. You need to be masterful in your communication. But I think the bit that gets forgotten the most is what is the audience needing or expecting? And how do you help align their needs and expectations and the message you want to share? So we need to be able to understand from their point of view, or their level of understanding, or their ability to concentrate, or the quality of their uh, uh, the quality of rapport you have with that person, because they all affect the degree to which they'll
Right.
listen to what you're going to say. And then all you need to do at that point is make sure that you say it in a very simple way.
Right. So, as a leader of an organization, what I do is I understand how I communicate with my team, to the individual team and also with everyone in the team. But as a leader, I'm also supposed to foster that collaboration, foster communication between the team, inside the team, right? And as a leader, how can we actually help the other persons in the team communicate better with each other as well?
Yeah. I think as a professional and a leader, one of our goals is to have a strong rapport with the key people in your network. And so the easiest way to do that is, for instance, go write down everyone who's important in your professional career. Give a number between 0 and 10. What's the caliber of relationship you have with them? And decide whether the number you come up with is sufficient to maintain the value you create within your network.
Right.
And then you need to then work out, well, what would you need to do to enhance that and maintain that in a strategic way? So it's not just speaking to someone when you get the opportunity, and it's not just saying something when you turn. It's about being purposeful and deliberate with the quality of relationships and the quality of communication you have, so that your rapport is enhanced, not only as you're in the room, but before you even turn up. And that's called reputation management, or brand, personal brand.
Right. And how can that personal brand extend to the team as well, right? Because the team understands, as a brand or as a leader, the team understands that there's always, what I find is there's always a sort of lack of communication, better communication within the team as well, right? So there are 5 people in a team. A leader concisely tells what the job is, but ultimately the job is to be done by the team, the team of 5. But there might be a difference in communication between them. So as a leader, how can we better help them, build rapport themselves with each other and work out between themselves?
I think it's helping your team understand that there's multiple levels of communication. There's maintenance level communication, which is making sure you're consistent and making sure you're clear. And then there's the next level up is reputation or relationship building, which is what do you need to do to add value to the conversation or narrative or project that you're currently engaged in.
Right.
And then there's strategic communication, which is what do you need to do? Preempt any potential challenges or any opportunities you want to develop that start well before those things become an issue.
Right.
And so if you're thinking about your value and communication in that way, and then you can help your individual team members recognize those 3 levels as well, then you have a culture of effective communication and influence, not a skill set of communication and influence.
Right.
Because if you have the skills, you'll use it if it's convenient and you remember. But a culture is something you do instinctively.
Right.
And so even if someone new to the team joins, they adopt that social norm, they adopt that culture. And so if you can instill that culture of effective communication and influence at those levels, then it's just what people do.
Right. So people may be effective in communication individually, might have the skill set, but if they are put in a culture where communication is lax, if people do not like to communicate with each other, then a skilled communicator will also fall down to the culture, right? So if the culture is strong, a person with the lower communication skills will move up, but the culture is the thing that sets the bar. If the culture is that people do not communicate with each other, then that is what is going to happen in the team as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So when I'm talking about or talking to my team, right? So talking about job performance, work performance, there are some hard things to communicate as well, right? So when you are talking about their work, that might not be sufficiently good enough for the expectation that we have, and so we need to give feedback. And when we do give those feedbacks, how can we be effective in giving the feedback where we do not antagonize the person, but also help him understand the level of work or the level that we demand of them?
Yeah. I think it's about understanding that when you're in a professional engagement, there's 3 things we need to be, to recognize: the quality of your work, the quality of your competency, and the quality of your relationship you have with that person. Now, if you have a great relationship, giving feedback's easier than poor relationship. You know, if you create quality work and you happen to have a day where you're having an off day, then people will just go, "Oh, they normally do good work.
Right.
Today must have just been an off day." And then there's the quality of your competency, which is your ability to sustain the quality of your work on a consistent basis. And it's about managing all 3. And I would argue that if you have a high quality relationship, the other 2 can suffer even a little bit and you can still survive.
Right.
But if you have a terrible relationship with someone and your quality slips, that's when it gets difficult. And so knowing that is then, if you need to communicate that with someone else, you need to be able to distinguish that when you're judging their work, you're not judging them.
Right.
And you need them to understand that you're not judging their work, you're judging their work, not them.
Right.
But then you also need to be clear about what expectations that you want that new standard to be. And I would potentially even talk to them about, well, how do we prevent this happening in the future? How can I support you in that? So that you're coming in with a supportive narrative rather than a correction narrative.
Right.
Because a correction is telling something that they're probably already uncomfortable with. You also, as a leader, need to understand that some people like very prescriptive and detailed guidance, and some people don't. And you need to be able to evaluate, well, what's the type of feedback that the person prefers, and meet them at that level as well.
Right. And also expanding on this question, right? We are now talking about one-to-one, right? But as a leader, you also have to look after the one-to-many or the communications that is being happening, or the feedback loop or the conflicts that arise in the team. And as a leader, what strategies would you suggest a leader to use to resolve those in the team?
I think the first thing you have to accept is that conflicts will happen, and that you probably should have a plan or a strategy before it breaks down as your best case scenario. Now, you don't always get that option, but that is your best case scenario, because the law of averages says that something will go wrong at some point. Then the next thing is you do something what's called a pre-mortem, which is imagine everything that could possibly go wrong.
Right.
And everything that you could potentially do to either prevent it or manage it before the project even engages. That's the second part. So this is all preventative work and
Right.
preventative communication. And then there's the active and post, which is active is how you're choosing to engage with them at the moment in real time.
Yeah.
And this is where the quality of your relationship and rapport become really important. And you really want to do that before it breaks down. And then even post, how do you have enough rapport and relationship to go, okay, given all that happened, now that that's behind us,
Right.
what would we need to do as professionals to manage this situation future forward?
Right.
And so it's about understanding there's a pre-work, there's during work, and there's post-work that we need to be mindful of in terms of our communication and our strategy of communication to make sure that we're smoothing out the extremes. And that's all you can do in any given situation to minimize the damage and maximize the value created.
I like that you have a risk management approach to communication, right? Where you already plan for what could go wrong and put in place the preventive measures. And when it does happen, maybe something we might not have planned, right? What we have planned, we will do according to what we plan. But if something is a black swan event, essentially, you try and do whatever you can in that context, but also learn, and again, for future, you put it in your plan and better help on those future conflicts that might arise.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of a guy called James Clear who says you don't rise to the level of your potential, you fall to your level of your systems.
Right.
And, I don't think people have a good comms and influence system.
Mm.
And I think they should.
Right. Yes, that is also what I have witnessed in many accounting firms, right? And also in many businesses that we deal with, where they have systems for everything else, tech, finance, operations, everything. But when it comes to people and people management, they tend to be quite lax. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Now, what do I want to talk about is client communications, right? Our firm has their internal resources, their internal team, but also major communication does happen on a regular basis with their clients. And what difference do you think there should be the approach between communicating with your own team and communicating with your clients?
Well, rather than talking about the difference, let's start with what's common.
Yeah.
And then work out where the variation happens, because we need to manage for variation.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to manage for variation, you need to work out what's common. And so what's common is everyone's a human being. And what's common is you have a desire to have a productive relationship. And what's common is you have a desire to work together both strategically and hopefully with a clear sense of direction about what that outcome to be. And so that includes, what do you want to say? How often do you want to say it? At what level do you want to say it? How regularly does it need to be said? When do you need to revisit? When do you need to review, etc.? So these are all client-based interactions, and arguably you could do these internally as well. But from a client, I think it's both a professional courtesy
Mm-hmm.
and a strategic advantage to have something in place where you know what you want the outcome to be. Then I would argue that the next level or layer is, what's the quality of rapport and relationship you have with the key stakeholders of that project?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because I would rate those out of 10, and I would make sure that they're maintained at a high level.
Right.
Which means even if you've got nothing to say that week, you still drop in and go, haven't forgotten about you.
Yeah.
Just wanted you to know the project's still on track. I'm loving the way we're working together. Let's keep going.
Mm.
And then just keep going. Stay on the radar, in other words.
Right.
Have a reason to interact and engage, right? Because it's familiarity is what creates the resilience.
Right. So you should focus on building relationship. Even if you have nothing to talk about of the project that you are working, right? The project is going on in its usual course, but you should focus on the relationship, and you should continuously keep them in the loop, even if there is nothing to be said, but just ping that we are working and it's going great. And if there is any problems, you could ask us, or if there is any problem, we could, communicate easily.
Yeah, exactly. Invariably, if you're going to pick up a problem, you want to pick it up as early as possible. And if they have an issue and they know they speak to you every week, then that niggling thing might be easy to fix.
Yeah.
But if you don't speak to them for a long period of time and then it escalates and escalates and escalates, then they might not communicate to you until it's almost irrecoverable.
Right.
And that's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So, work with a preventative and proactive mindset and attitude to problem solving, relationship, and rapport in the same way that you do a project.
Yeah, right. So even if there is nothing to be said, right? If we are talking, then something might come up, right? Where there might be small issue that they want clarification with. But if we are not in the loop for quite a long time, those things, one question will lead to two, three, four, and it will accumulate. By the time they do communicate with us, it's too late, right?
Exactly. The other advantage is you get to understand how they think, how they react, how they operate, so you get to understand the nuances of the nature of that person, not just the function of their role within the project.
Right. Okay. And now the current landscape is that the clients are also, remote. The teams are also remote. Not just remote, but also they might be in different countries altogether. Right. And so most of the communications happen through emails or through Slacks or other apps, right? And what is the right thing to do, or what's the right approach while you are not talking face to face and using those technological products, technology to communicate? What should you think about when you are using those things?
So different media by which you communicate, whether that's a phone call or in person or online, are just mechanisms for communication.
Right.
And there's advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of in person is you build trust and rapport. The disadvantage is it's difficult to do if they're in a different country. So if it's over, like we're doing, communicating in a virtual sense, the advantage is we can meet in our own time zones and in our own space.
Yeah.
The disadvantage is that things classically, in my experience, take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And require a little bit more clarification. You almost need to overstate it very, very slightly, because there's a lot that it can demonstrate rapport, body language, working with someone regularly that you can't do if you just turn on the camera, do your thing, and then disappear.
Right.
The main advantage of a screen is you're about an arm's length from the camera. And I can see everything about your face. I can see corners of your mouth tighten up. I can see eyebrows currently flick. I can see corners of eyes move. I can't do that in a meeting room.
Right.
So I can pick up microfacial movements in a virtual call that I can't in a physical room.
Right.
And the advantage is I can pick up the small things before they escalate. Same thing. There are 1,500 microfacial movements that, when combined, we call emotion.
Yeah.
And they're almost impossible to spot without a camera. And so the advantage of doing virtual is you've got a camera within 1 meter of someone's face. You would never sit within 1 meter of every attendee's face in an in-person meeting.
Right.
And so there's huge advantages. TEDx Melbourne, our satisfaction scores exponentially increased during our virtual events because we knew what to say, we knew when to say it, and we had a plan for what happened if things didn't go to plan.
Yeah.
And because we could control the variables, and because we could have multiple people spotting the challenges as a group, we spotted them earlier and we managed them better. And so we were able to be much more effective virtually in terms of impact and relationship and rapport than in person, because we knew what we were looking for.
Right. So this is actually a very new insight that I've received, right? Because most people, what they think is if you are in person, that is way better than meeting virtually. But when you are meeting virtually, you have your... Okay.
So there are advantages to doing it virtually, and there are advantages for doing it in person.
Yeah.
And knowing which advantages you need to capitalize on is the difference between effective communication or ineffective communication. You can be an ineffective communication in person as well.
Yeah.
In the same way that you could be ineffective on virtual or online if you don't know which mechanisms to look for and which to manage.
Right.
And it's about knowing what to manage depending on the medium by which you're communicating.
So we are talking about the medium and what the advantages or disadvantages each medium might bring. And also we are talking about remote teams and remote clients. The globalization aspect of the work culture is that people are from all around the world, and there's, when communicating, there are issues with cultures and also language. And how do you be better at speaking culturally to another person of a different culture, and also with a language barrier where a person might not be of a English speaking country, or English might be a second language for them.
Sure. So again, coming back to basics, what's the quality of your relationship you have for someone? Is it high enough to maintain operational efficiency? And is it high enough to build trust and rapport when things go wrong?
Right.
And that's what you should be aiming for. So it's higher than just standard, we need to speak every week.
Mhm.
It's like when we catch up every week, we have a great experience. They love the way we're interacting. They have good rapport. And then if something goes wrong, it's not going to be dramatically bad because they have a trust and rapport in you. So think about your networks, think about the quality of relationship you have with those people, and then make sure you take it one or two notches above what's operational.
Right.
So that when things go wrong, you've got something to bank on. Stephen Covey called this the emotional bank account. Now, when it comes to different cultures, what people need or expect or value then are just additional variables over on top of the typical conversations you might have with that person.
Yeah.
So it's just treating it like a different, like in the same way that virtual versus phone versus in person is a variable. Morning or afternoon is a variable.
Right.
Whether they've had a coffee is a variable. Culture is a variable. Language is a variable. I don't differentiate. I
Right.
just think that there's different ways to manage those variables to optimize the effectiveness of the relationship that you need to have to get these projects over the line.
Right. So you should understand each variable, and when you are communicating, how each variable affects your communication. Culture might be one aspect, so you should educate yourself of the culture of the person you are talking to.
Yes. So that affects things like mindset,
Mm.
mentality,
Yeah.
comprehension, patience, expectation, maybe proactive, reactive type behaviors. I'm going to call it aggressiveness, but it's more. Are you an active culture? Or are you a passive culture? And there's a lot of research in what's called open and closed cultures. And open cultures tend to value the community as a collective more, and closed cultures don't. And so different countries have variations of that open and closed mindset. And so understanding the nature of that culture as well as the function of that culture or the function of the project then just becomes one of the things you've got to consider in order to build the trust, rapport, relationship, and engagement with that group or that
Right.
individual.
Right.
And then obviously individuals may or may not conform with their traditional cultural background. Like I have a Chinese background and I have probably a more Australian inclination than a Chinese inclination, but I relate to Chinese inclinations much more readily and much easier
Right.
because I have an awareness and a background and an upbringing that allows me to observe that. But I had to increase my Australianness, if you want to call it that, to manage how I engage with my Australian colleagues in the same way that when I lived in England, I had to increase my English nature and how they do things in order to achieve things there. It's about being adaptable to what the needs and expectations of the listening audience is looking for.
Right. So while managing the teams here in Nepal, right, and also talking with clients in Australia or the other parts of the world, what I've found is communication with me and the clients is quite good. But when it comes with team, the cultural difference tends to play a big role, right? The Nepali
Yes.
community, they tend to be more focused on the work, and they are not too they are not too aggressive. I think I'm using the wrong word, but you know, uh,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah. But other
Assertive.
Western, yeah, the Western cultures are quite assertive and also quite frank when they are talking. So
Yes.
that gap I do find, and how do you think that could be managed between understanding the culture here as well as for the clients outside? So both, how can I, as a person, you know, as a go between these two cultures, help the Australian clients understand the Nepali culture, but also the Nepali workers help understand the Australian or the Western culture?
Yeah, I think again, it's kind of thinking at levels. how do you engage with that person as an individual? How do you engage with a person from a cultural or country level, but even region maybe is also a factor?
Yeah.
Especially very big countries like China or the United States, the North act differently to the people in the South.
Yeah.
And so, there's, I guess we'll call regional nuances we need to activate in. And so when it's remote, I think we need to spend more time understanding the broad brush nature of those groups and subgroups, and then spending probably very deliberate time with the individuals we're engaging with and getting to know them as a human being first. What's important to them? What drives them? What knowledge, experience, and background do they have? What biases do they potentially have? What are their cultural inclinations? How do they like to think? How proactive or reactive are they? What are their current stress levels?
Right.
What are their key projects? What are the key elements in those projects, and how do you help them solve those? What's happening in their family life? What's happening in their country? What's happening in their country related to the rest of the world? For instance, South Korea just had a significant issue with their president.
Right.
And so how does that impact the people locally?
Yeah.
How does it impact people non-locally? So I'm in Australia, I'm speaking to my South Korean friends here,
Yeah.
and they're impacted differently to people who are in country.
Yeah.
And sort of, be genuinely interested in the nature of how the world is operating and how that personally impacts them as an individual. Then you can come back to the personal or individual human to human connection again, which
Right.
where I started at the very beginning of this conversation, where you create the synergies and narratives that are meaningful over and above functional, this is what we need to do today.
All right. And would you also suggest some kind of cultural training for the teams here and also with the
I would
clients?
say,
Yeah.
I would highly recommend that cultural awareness be. So I work with an organization, and then every year they fly me to Malaysia, and the people from China and Japan and Taiwan and India and Malaysia and Singapore all come in, and we talk about cultural nuances in terms of communication.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, please go ahead.
and I think it's really important to have a broad understanding, but also a key relationship and rapport building exercise as a group.
Right. So now I want to get back to the technology that we are talking about, right? The technology now, automation has also come into the play for communications, right? So if you are a client, you do not have to go ahead and directly interact with them. There are certain triggers that sends emails to them. And how effective do you think those kind of automation in communications have been, or how can we be more effective on setting those kind of automations on communications and get good results and establish good client relationships?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit complicated. I think it depends on where you are in that relationship journey. I think fully automated communication, works well at scale, but doesn't work at an individual level, especially if it comes to something that's people see as very specific or nuanced to their personal situation. So it's a combination of where they're at, the type of offering you have,
Yeah.
how often they expect you to communicate, and what problem do you ultimately solve. And that's the key one.
Right.
And if you can solve it explicitly well through pure automation, then that should be an option.
Right.
But if you can't do it purely through automation, then you need to find a way to build some touch points and at a personal level. And so it's very much finding out what that line is. I wouldn't say go whole one-on-one delivery, and I wouldn't say 100% whole automation. You need to work out, well, what is the value you create in that narrative? To what degree does it need to be personally delivered? To what degree can you potentially automate? But then set the expectation that if you're going to automate it, that they're buying into the automation because you're interested in creating speed and value and clarity as part of that equation over and on top of your knowledge, experience, background.
Right.
But this is where trust comes into it. If they trust an email, you're fine. If they don't trust the email, you're not fine.
Right.
But same with in person. If they trust you in person, that you're fine. If they don't trust you in person, you've got a problem. So what is their degree of trust in that medium?
Right.
when you're engaging with them that allows you to move the needle forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to then adjust accordingly. That's going to maximize the value you create for the community size that you want to create.
Right.
Knowing that the moment you create a rule, there's always going to be someone who falls outside of that rule.
Right.
And then you need to decide, is that worth addressing or not? And some people will choose to address it and some people won't.
Right.
And so this is where brands like Nike have been astonishingly effective in that they're running software,
Yeah.
which isn't even a product,
Mhm.
is worth more than their shoe product
Right.
or their sports apparel product, because it's the quality of relationships they have through that digital mechanism
Mhm.
that's important to them, not the fact that they have a new shoe line coming out or a new, product coming online, although it still needs to meet the needs and expectations of that community
Right.
from a functional point of view, from an affordability point of view, from a reliability point of view. But the quality of relations they create through automation for them has been incredibly successful. Apple do a great job there. I would say Tesla do a good job there. But there's very, very few brands that do great or exceptional digital relationships.
Right. And would you also say that this kind of automation and expectations of communications would be different in different industry, right? Like in the professional
Yes.
services or for in accounting firms, the clients expect the communication to be ongoing, and that cannot a little automation we could bring in, but we could not fully depend on automation to establish that relationship and take that relationship forward.
Yeah, I think it's really critical that we don't confuse information with value. If what they're receiving is perceived to be high value, they might prefer it as an email, they might prefer it as in person, but the fact is there's value.
Yeah.
If there's value, they'll engage with it. It doesn't matter whether it's automated or not. Our job as communicators, as leaders, is to add value, not share information. And I think there's a big difference.
So, last question I'd like to ask you is now, I think this is a given for every podcast or everything we talk about. We talk about AI. What do you think AI is bringing into the communication strategies or communication aspect of business, and where do you see this going forward?
Yeah, I think AI has a huge potential. I think that the current equivalency is that AI is able to deliver work at a quality level of a smart intern.
Mm.
But you would never get a smart intern to deliver the product or service that you offer.
Right.
So that's its current level. To what degree will it go from smart intern to significant value add? Look, Sam Altman claims it's 2027. I don't agree. And the reason for that is he even personally stated that he needed $7 trillion in order for that to happen. And he hasn't got $7 trillion. And then just last week, even though he's claiming AGI will happen, which is the most advanced type of AI,
Yeah.
he's now stepping down from that and going, actually, maybe we won't quite get there. So he himself is admitting that AI is not really what it's cracked up to be. And so he's got a financial reason to
Right.
hype up and arc up
Mhm.
AI. The reality is, how many people are using it on a significant and daily basis to do regular tasks for regular things that they always do?
Right.
And I would say that the average worker, that's not very high. I would say that you need to have, my general rule of thumb is 80-20, right? 20% of my work could be 100% automated by this particular AI on a daily basis.
Right.
I don't see any tools that do that at the moment. And I don't think we're going to see anything in the near future for a whole bunch of complex reasons, mostly because most AI doesn't speak to other AI. And there's a reason for that. ChatGPT has no financial incentive to work better with Google's Gemini.
Yeah.
Why? Because Gemini wants to keep its own data and its own technology to itself,
Right.
in the same way that AI wants to keep its technology to it. And so until there's an open agreement that the format, the speed, the quality, the complexity level of the interaction and sharing of that data is not only consistent, but addresses privacy and security issues at a global level. And at the moment, what people consider as private and secure is different depending on the country.
Right.
And that is not going to change in the short term. And so that's going to be the key blocker for a universal AI.
Right.
And so I actually don't feel that we're going to get significant scale use of AI on a daily basis for most tasks for at least another 10 years.
Right. Yeah, so,
unless there's some key things that change.
Mm.
And I don't have time to break them down today.
Right, no worries. John, that was my last question. Thank you very much for nicely breaking down what makes an effective communication within your team and outside with your clients. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for this insightful episode.
No worries. Anytime.